When people talk about Meghan Markle, the story usually begins with her breakout role on Suits and ends with her stepping into royal life. But Tom Bower digs into a chapter. Meghan herself has spent years trying to bury the whispers of her so-called yacht girl past. Now, let's be clear. This isn't about shaming someone for working hard to climb their way up. Meghan has always branded herself as the Hollywood underdog, the self-made actress who rose from nothing to become a duchess. It's a powerful story, one that helped millions connect with her. But here's the problem. That story doesn't line up with the rumors that have followed her for more than a decade. According to Bower, Meghan's rise had less to do with raw talent and more to do with carefully calculated networking, exclusive yacht parties, powerful men in her circle, and connections that seemed to push her career forward at just the right time. These aren't just casual rumors whispered online, they're stories that have refused to disappear, no matter how often Meghan denies them. And that's the part that raises eyebrows. If something keeps coming back year after year, people naturally start asking, why won't this go away? Meghan herself has been vocal about how insulting these claims are. She's called them sexist, defamatory, and unfair a way of undermining her ambition. And in some ways, she's right. Ambitious women often face harsher criticism than men. But Bower argues that it isn't about ambition at all. It's about contradictions. And Meghan, for all her efforts, has built a narrative full of them. She says she was self-made, but her critics point out doors that seem to open a little too smoothly. She paints her story as a grind through auditions and rejections. But insiders whisper that influential connections gave her a shortcut. And the bigger contradiction is this. Meghan has worked harder than anyone to control her image. But the harder she pushes, the more people start noticing the cracks. Bower sees this as the very beginning of her unraveling. Not because the yacht girl rumors themselves prove anything concrete, but because they set the tone for everything that followed. Once an audience sees inconsistencies in the foundation of your story, they start questioning everything built on top of it. And that's where Meghan's troubles really begin. Because this wasn't just about old rumors, it was the start of a pattern of controlling the narrative so tightly that the truth and the performance blur together. And as Bower points out, when you're living inside a story you created, the spotlight doesn't always flatter you. Sometimes it burns. But Meghan's past wasn't the only thing raising questions. The real turning point came when people noticed just how closely she seemed to be modeling herself after another royal woman, someone whose shadow still looms large over the monarchy. And that's where things start to feel even more unsettling. If Meghan's past raised questions, her present raised even more. And one of the most uncomfortable parts of Tom Bower's criticism is Meghan's almost uncanny obsession with Princess Diana. Think about it. Every royal bride gets compared to Diana in some way. It's almost unavoidable. But Meghan's choices went far beyond coincidence. Outfits, poses, even the way she spoke about vulnerability, it all felt like she was trying to slip into Diana's shoes. At first, some people saw it as a tribute, a way of honoring Harry's late mother. But as time went on, the similarities stopped looking sweet and started looking staged. Here's the difference. At least according to Bower, Diana didn't have to try. Her vulnerability was raw, unfiltered, and painfully human. She didn't craft her sorrow for the cameras. It simply spilled out in moments that were impossible to ignore. Meghan, on the other hand, has been accused of performing vulnerability. From the carefully arranged expressions to the polished sound bites, it all feels just a little too rehearsed. And the public notices. They may not analyze every detail, but audiences have an instinct for authenticity. Diana's tears broke hearts because they were real. Meghan's critics argue, don't land the same way. They feel curated, as if someone pressed play on a scene designed to win sympathy. And when emotion looks like strategy, the effect backfires. Instead of drawing people in, it pushes them away. One example that sticks out is the Oprah interview. It was supposed to be Meghan's defining Diana moment, a raw conversation that redefined her story. But the comparisons ended up making things worse. Fact-checkers quickly tore into her claims, and what was meant to be a new beginning instead fed into the growing narrative that her story simply didn't add up. Bower argues this obsession with Diana isn't just awkward, it's dangerous for Meghan's image, because the more she tries to replicate someone else's legacy, the more she loses control of her own. And once the public feels they're watching an imitation rather than the real thing, sympathy turns into skepticism. And skepticism spreads fast, which is exactly what happened after the Oprah interview. What was meant to be Meghan's big breakthrough moment quickly turned into another storm of contradictions, fact checks, and doubt. And that's where the story takes a sharper turn. Because if the cracks were showing before, the Oprah fallout was the earthquake that shook Meghan's entire narrative. When Meghan and Harry sat down with Oprah, it was marketed as their chance to finally set the record straight. A tell-all moment. A chance to take back the narrative from the tabloids, the palace, and the critics. For Meghan, it was supposed to be the moment she cemented her own Diana-like chapter in history, a vulnerable conversation that would earn global sympathy. But here's the problem. The world was watching, and in today's world, fact-checkers don't take weekends off. Within days, some of Meghan's most emotional claims were being ripped apart online. Take her statement that she never Googled Harry before meeting him. That one sounded innocent enough, just a sweet story of fate. But almost immediately, people pulled up old photos of Meghan wearing Princess Diana's jewelry years earlier. How do you explain that? Coincidence? Or preparation? Then there was her insistence that she knew nothing about royal protocol, as if she was blindsided by traditions once she married in. Yet friends of Meghan's had long been part of royal-adjacent circles, and insiders revealed she was far more aware than she let on. To critics, it didn't just look like a small white light, looked like a pattern. And that's Bauer's whole point. One or two questionable details might slip by, but when the inconsistencies pile up, they drown everything else. He puts it bluntly, when you tell enough lies, they flood the whole picture. And once that happens, people stop believing anything at all. The Oprah interview didn't just raise eyebrows, cracked open the foundation of Meghan's entire story. Suddenly, instead of being seen as a truth-teller, she was painted as a manipulator. Instead of looking authentic, she looked rehearsed. And instead of earning sympathy, she fueled doubt. And that doubt didn't stay confined to the interview. It spilled over into her marriage, her public appearances, and her Hollywood projects. People began to look at everything she did with suspicion. Was it genuine, or was it another act? And that suspicion, Bauer argues, has poisoned the very heart of her fairy tale, the marriage itself. Because once the public starts questioning your honesty, even the most romantic story starts to look staged. And in Meghan's case, what looked like a dream partnership to the world may be little more than a fragile business deal behind the scenes. From the outside, Meghan and Harry's marriage looks like a modern fairy tale red carpet. Glossy Netflix documentaries, perfectly staged family portraits, but Tom Bauer paints a far less romantic picture. To him, what the world sees is not a love story, but a business partnership held together by PR strategy and shared branding. Behind closed doors, Bauer claims, the cracks are far more visible, and he argues those cracks were always there, just covered by a careful arrangement of photo ops and interviews. The emotional gap between Meghan and Harry has become harder to ignore. Small contradictions in their stories, awkward public appearances, and carefully staged moments that feel less like real love and more like a marketing campaign. One of the harshest allegations Bauer makes is that Meghan even uses her children as shields, bringing them into headlines whenever criticism gets too sharp. A family photo here, a bedtime story anecdote, there it shifts the conversation, wins sympathy, and softens the backlash. But to Bauer, it isn't about family, it's about control. And that's where the fairy tale begins to sour. For Meghan, appearances have always been everything. But the harder she works to keep the marriage picture perfect, the more forced it begins to look. A candid smile caught on camera feels a little too rehearsed. A stroll down the street with Harry feels like a setup for photographers. Even their joint interviews have moments that make viewers wonder, is this natural or is it scripted? And the problem with scripting love is that audiences can sense when something's off. What was once seen as a glamorous royal romance now risks being interpreted as a performance that Hollywood is no longer buying. Because here's the twist. While Meghan tried to control the narrative, Hollywood, the very machine she once counted on, began quietly pulling away. At first, she had the elite dinners, the star-studded events, the red carpet invites. But little by little, the calls stopped coming. And once Hollywood decides you're bad for business, it doesn't take long for the silence to feel deafening. And that's exactly where Meghan found herself. A duchess without an audience, watching as the most powerful industry in the world began shutting its doors. When Meghan first stepped into the Hollywood spotlight as a duchess, she carried an aura that few could ignore. She wasn't just another actress trying to make it, she was royalty. And in Hollywood, that kind of title can open doors faster than talent ever could. Invitations to elite events rolled in, producers were eager to meet her, and celebrities treated her like the ultimate status symbol. For a while, Meghan believed she had it made. The Duchess card was powerful. It gave her the kind of influence most actors spend decades chasing. But here's the thing about Hollywood. It doesn't hand out permanent memberships. The industry thrives on trends, and just as quickly as it lifts you up, it can decide you're no longer worth the risk. And that's exactly what happened. Quietly, almost without anyone noticing at first, the shine began to fade. Big-name producers stopped calling. A-listers who once smiled for photos kept their distance. Invitations that used to arrive every week slowed to a trickle. Meghan wasn't being openly rejected. Hollywood doesn't work like that. Instead, it was the silent exile. The whispers behind closed doors that she was difficult to work with, too focused on herself, and unpredictable. And in Hollywood, unpredictability is poison. Studios don't want drama, they want reliability. They don't want a star who might hijack the spotlight, they want someone who plays the part. Meghan, with her carefully staged moments and relentless need to control the narrative, became a risk. Not because she lacked talent, but because she brought too much baggage. What's worse, she turned into what industry insiders call a brand liability. It's the kind of label that spreads like wildfire. One producer mentions it over lunch, another director hears it at a dinner party, and suddenly, no one wants their name attached. Hollywood is a small world at the top, and when the tide turns against you, it turns fast. And this wasn't just about Meghan's career, it was about perception. The more she insisted on being the center of attention, the more people whispered that she made everything about herself, that she thrived on drama, that working with her meant inheriting her controversies. And let's face it, no A-lister wants to gamble their reputation on someone who might drag them into headlines for all the wrong reasons. So slowly, quietly, Hollywood shut her out. Smiles turned to polite nods, invitations dried up, phone calls stopped being returned. She went from being the royal guest everyone wanted on their red carpet to the name no one wanted to bring up in conversation. And as Bauer points out, this wasn't personal, it was strategic. Hollywood isn't sentimental, it's business. And when a person becomes more trouble than they're worth, they get erased. But Meghan wasn't about to let go of her grip on the spotlight. The problem was, the tighter she tried to hold on, the more obvious it became that her image wasn't real at all. And that's when the spiral began, the endless performance of a woman trying to prove authenticity, only to look more manufactured with every move she made. Once Hollywood began stepping back, Meghan doubled down on the one thing she thought she could still control: her image. But instead of saving her reputation, that obsession became the very thing tearing it apart. Every photo, every interview, every carefully arranged outing with Harry or the kids started to feel less like real life and more like a production, a coffee run in California. Paparazzi just happened to be there, a family snapshot. Perfect lighting, flawless makeup, and a backdrop that looked like it was lifted straight from a lifestyle ad. Even moments that were meant to show her as normal felt oddly staged, like mini productions designed to keep the Meghan brand alive. And here's the thing, audiences notice. Maybe not at first, but over time, people can sense when something feels too polished. What once looked glamorous now looked fake. And instead of pulling people in, it pushed them further away. Bauer even went as far as accusing Meghan of using her children as props in this ongoing image campaign. According to him, whenever criticism became too loud, suddenly a new headline would appear. Photos of Meghan baking with Lily, or stories of Harry reading bedtime tales to Archie. On the surface, it looked sweet, but to skeptics, it felt like a distraction, a way to redirect attention and play on public sympathy. And nothing damages authenticity more than the sense that someone is manipulating emotion. Then came the Diana parallels again. Meghan's wardrobe choices, her camera angles, even the way she walked into events seemed rehearsed to mimic the late princess. But instead of drawing admiration, it sparked eye rolls. Diana's pain had been spontaneous, raw, and heartbreaking. Meghan's, critics argued, was curated like she was playing a role rather than living her truth. The danger of this kind of control is simple. The harder you try to look authentic, the more fake you appear. And once the public makes that decision about you, it's almost impossible to reverse. By this point, Meghan wasn't just fighting bad press, she was fighting exhaustion. Not just her own, but the audience's. People grew tired of the endless narratives, the shifting identities, the constant stream of performances. One day, she was the misunderstood royal, the next a feminist icon, then the protective mother, then the brave outsider. It was too much, and instead of connecting, it left viewers feeling manipulated. And the cruel irony? The very thing she thought would keep her powerful, her ability to shape her story, was what ended up destroying the trust she needed to keep that story alive. But the collapse of her image wasn't just happening in headlines, it was starting to unravel her entire brand, her deals, her partnerships, even her place in the royal conversation. And that's when the sympathy she once had as an outsider began to completely vanish. When Meghan first joined the royal family, she was seen as a breath of fresh air, American, biracial, outspoken, and different from the royals before her. People rooted for her, but sympathy doesn't last forever. Soon, the contradictions piled up carefully staged moments, shifting narratives, and endless rebranding. As Tom Bauer calls it, this was the collapse of a brand. Her business failures only fueled that collapse. The Spotify deal, once hyped as her big platform, fizzled quickly. Critics called it shallow and half-hearted. Then came Netflix, where projects started strong but quickly lost steam. Insiders complained of too much branding, not enough heart. Even the royal family, once her shield, went silent. Charles stopped mentioning her, William refused to engage, and Kate avoided her name altogether. In image building, silence can cut deeper than criticism. By then, Meghan had lost the one thing that once made her powerful: public sympathy. Supporters stopped defending her, and when social media turned backlash wasn't private anymore, it was happening live, for the world to see. If Meghan's image was struggling in Hollywood and the palace, it was on social media where it truly collapsed. Unlike private circles, the online world is loud, brutal, and immediate. Clips meant to inspire became meetings. TikTok edits turned dramatic moments into sarcastic sound bites. Her speeches, meant to show strength, were dissected line by line for contradictions. Old footage resurfaced to mock rather than praise, chipping away at her image. Even her defenders grew silent. Fans who had once justified missteps either walked away or turned critical. Meghan's story wasn't inspiring anymore. Was confusing. As Tom Bauer put it, her lies could flood the earth. Not one lie, but the weight of many contradictions, leaving every news story sounding like fiction. By now, skepticism had turned to mockery. The Duchess, who once symbolized modern change, had become a cautionary tale of overexposure. Meghan Markle wasn't seen as hero or villain, she had become a question mark. And when trust disappears, the brand collapses. The fairy tale isn't just over, it's unraveling in real time,